a great supporter. She's CEO of AmCham in EU, as well as chairwoman of our organization, Co-American Chambers in Europe, which I'm not going to tell you what this means because she's going to have her part on that presentation. And of course, we have Olivier, this time our president, Olivier Marquette, who is this time not in France. He's in Brussels. Am I right, Olivier?
Sorry, I'm back in France, but I'll be in Brussels next week, you know.
And you're honest with us. Thank you very much for honesty. And by the way, maybe this is not a bad idea, Olivier, because you can travel from France to Bulgaria, but probably from Belgium, that would be a challenge for you. So check it out.
Yes,
Check it out.
exactly.
Maybe
I
it's
need
better to stay where you are. Anyway, without further ado, I'm giving you the opening words, Olivier, and thank you all of our members. There are more than 50 today with us. So let's start it with you, Olivier.
Thank you, Peter and Eva. Well, thanks a ton for being with us today. Indeed, I mean you're very much a friend of AmCham, whether it's in Brussels or with AmCham Bulgaria. I know we share a lot of common values. We've exchanged actually during the crisis. I know you've been extremely active in promoting corporate social responsibility initiatives to help doctors and hospitals in Bulgaria. As AmCham, as I told you, we've indeed joined as well a big initiative, United Against COVID-19, where we raised a record amount from our members to support hundreds of projects in Bulgaria to support doctors and hospitals. So I think we share these common values of CSR. You also are extremely active on the digital front, and I think, well, Bulgaria, and we have a number of our members super active in the digital field, and I think that will be one of the topics today. So again, and I'll be short, so I'm very happy that you're here with us today. We have a number of our members, and obviously in those difficult times, I think the link between Brussels and Sofia will be even stronger than before. I think there is huge need for solidarity, for supporting a number of companies, and the EU has taken obviously very impressive steps, and I think it will be very useful to hear your thoughts on how to make the most of it and to help on both ways, how to promote the growth in EU and how the EU can help as well Bulgaria, because even though we were not hit so hard in terms of the number of cases with COVID, I think the economic impact is being felt very strongly, and so we're very much looking forward to engaging with Brussels on and leveraging the number of funds. And so without further ado, so thanks again for being with us, and I'll hand over to Susan, who has also a few words, and before handing over to you, Eva. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Olivier and Peter. It's a pleasure to be in Sofia again. I like being in Sofia. I haven't been so often for quite a while now. So who said that the virtual world couldn't stop us traveling? But Eva, great to see you. I'm actually in Brussels, of course. I'm actually in the office. Welcome. Nice to meet all AmCham Bulgaria members. So I know I'm going to talk a bit later with my other hat on. As everyone may know, I have two hats on. So firstly, thank you, Peter, for allowing me to just introduce what is the AmChams in Europe network, which is the hat on I'll speak from now. I have the honor of being the chair of the AmChams in Europe network. It stands for ACE, and ACE was established in 1963. Not many people know that. It also serves as the umbrella organization for 45 independent AmChams around Europe and Eurasia. So it's not just the EU by any means at all. That's a whole separate thing. All these AmChams are fully independent and apolitical. But in Europe, importantly, this network represents the interests of more than 17,000 American and European companies employing 20 million workers and accounting for more than $1.1 trillion in investment on both sides of the Atlantic. So as an example, I'm not sure how much Eva knows about the AmChams network because we don't normally speak about that. So just so you know, Eva, as well, it's a bilateral voice of American and European companies And what the network does is to communicate the importance of the transatlantic economy in both Europe and in the USA. And actually, in fact, over the last few months, we've discovered more and more the incredible value of this network. We've never been as active as in the last few months. In fact, we've had numerous meetings both on sharing best practices, including the challenges that all these AmChams face, and our companies, as well as information and supporting each other. We actually did a virtual conference in Washington, D.C. 2 weeks ago because we weren't able to physically travel there. And we had a meeting every day with a different D.C. stakeholder. So really committed to transatlantic. But if I may, and just to the main message I wanted to give today was the message of the AmChams in Europe network. So indeed, these challenging times have required unprecedented action, as we all know. So on top of this internal coordination, we came up with some shared external messaging, which was signed unanimously by all 45 AmChams. And we called governments in all those countries to focus on three things. One is solidarity. Now is the time. It was 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and is still today. We have to continue to demonstrate the values that we share in Europe across the Atlantic and beyond. These are universal values. Two, coordination. We need to establish a consistent and harmonized approach to the crisis, whether it's the health crisis, the economic recovery, and also the societal crisis that we're now seeing emerge. And thirdly, action to ensure critical access to critical goods and services, protecting our supply chains all the way from the production stage to the final consumer. So in brief, just to finish, we believe that this crisis is indeed an opportunity to further strengthen the transatlantic relationship, build on those common values that do unite us. We have to support international cooperation. We have to rebuild mutual trust and ensure those supply chains remain open. And every single AmCham member company, whether they're European or US, in every single country, as we all know, has been impacted by the COVID pandemic, and we need to stand together. So with that, that's my introduction to the AmChams in Europe network, Eva, and AmCham Bulgaria members. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Actually, before any further delay, I would like to introduce you, Eva Maydell. But let me tell you a couple of things, like a Bulgarian who is very proud that we have such a member of European Parliament. Eva is not only a member of Parliament, but she is a true evangelist of the new things for innovation and startup, as well as digital economy. And actually, this make all of us proud, because in Bulgaria we are quite touchy when we're talking about the ICT and how good we are on that. So we couldn't have better representation than ever in the European Parliament. And I was following her career, amazing career actually, on because she's very young as well. And for me, it's not surprise at all that such a young and Bulgarian lady is actually probably the best representative that we could have in the European Parliament. And I'm saying this from the very deep of my heart, because I truly believe that exactly those faces we need to have there. And thank you very much, Eva, to be our guest today. And I know that the name of our small webinar is actually connected with something that we all experience the last 3 months. We kind of went to the digital, to the virtual reality only for 1 week. As Susan was joking, she seems to be in Sofia, but she's in Brussels. We never before even dared to do the video conferencing when we're sitting in the same city. How stupid we have been. Now each of us are understanding that this is absolutely possible, and you shouldn't do the traffic jam every morning with your car and going to the office, which is only 2 kilometers away, to losing another 40 minutes and polluting the air of the city and many, many other things. I hope that we are not going to back to that normality again. And I hope that if we learn something, we absolutely should apply it to our everyday life and work. Actually, we have seen a very ambitious plan from the European Commission to fight for the recovery of economy. And we have Eva now with us, and she may give us absolutely first-hand impact on what is the plans of the Commission and how she see this like a member of European Parliament, in what area, where she see the advantage of this package. Thank you very much, Eva, and floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very be able to join you this afternoon. Thank you to Olivier, to Susan. Thank you, Peter. It's been the introduction quite flattering. I'm not sure I could take it. I have to say that we are a very good team defending and representing the interests of I think not just the private sector, but society as a whole, and particularly also when it comes to Bulgaria. It's rare that people refer to members of the European Parliament as members that represent European citizens. More often, citizens tend to think they just have to represent their country's interests. And I think it's very important for us to also be able and to see the larger and the bigger picture when we take important decisions. And one of the most important decisions since the creation of the European Union, I have to say, is the current plan called Next Generation. It's a recovery plan. It's something to help all European economies not just simply go back to where they were pre-COVID-19, but most importantly, to help them. I would use a popular slogan that Ursula von der Leyen uses, to bounce forward. And this to happen, it will not just be enough for us to discuss, it will be very important for all of us to act. And in this respect, indeed, it is very important who represents us and whether we have good and viable ideas to put forward also as societies and as member states. I think that I met with AmCham EU, and thank you, Susan and the team. I think I was one of your first guests as MEPs in the beginning of the crisis, and that was 2 months ago. And back then, the issues were very different than they are today. And we can see how in a very short period of time, the immense change that happens in our societies and our economies. Back then, we were very worried on the first part that Susan emphasized, that ACHES has taken care of in its common statement and in common actions, and that was solidarity. There was a feeling in Europe that Europe is not doing enough and that member states are kind of deciding to do their own thing. And I think 2 months now down the line, we have managed to prove that there is not just solidar action, that there is not just coordination, but there is a clear way of how to make our economies more sustainable and better. One would say, why is this needed? Well, if we look at the numbers, the estimations go as far as much as 8% of economic shrinking for 2020. We're going to face, perhaps individually as member states, but also as EU, some of the most severe deep recession that our generation has ever faced. And this is why a little bit less than 2 years ago, 2 weeks ago, the Commission put forward this unprecedented recovery plan, which I will try to explain in a very simple way in order to be clearly understood. Because what I always find difficult is when Europe speaks with this humongous number, when we speak with trillions and billions, and especially in a country that has a lower GDP per capita, I don't think that tells so much. But I would first give you the numbers, and then we could speak about the means, and most importantly, about the projects. So first of all, we need to differentiate that currently there are two things being discussed at the European level. One is the usual 7-year budget that the European Commission and European institutions propose. So this is something that's being discussed every 7 years, and it's being renewed. And the other thing is the current recovery plan known as Next Generation. So the Next Generation plan, and I think this is where we could focus a little bit more, because the usual budget comes under the same form and format. And Bulgaria there keeps its good representation in terms of contribution, but also in terms of receiving. Of course, that would be also a topic we can discuss later in the discussion. So the unprecedented recovery plan consists of 750 billion euros to be used between 2021 and 2024. I very much like the name Next Generation EU. And this is because this has been one of my favorite expressions that I've been using over the past 5, 6, 7 years, because I always thought that whatever we do at a European sphere, it has to be with a long-term vision. And here perhaps comes from my generational, so to say, spirit. I always have also a bit of a critical outlook. And I think there has been a lot of excellent initiatives, but in terms of forward-looking investments, perhaps sometimes we have fallen short. So I hope that COVID-19, the past couple of months, the unprecedented amount of money that would be geared through financial markets and through contributions of member states would really make sure that it will not be just called Next Generation so that our kids will be the ones repaying for it, but most importantly, it would be the Next Generation EU plan that would make sure our economies are way much better, way much more prepared, way much more modern, our societies as a whole, in the long run. I have to make a little bit of a political point here before I explain a little bit more on the plan. And this is, I want to say why the Commission and the bigger member states decided to support this plan. I think it's important to understand the thinking. I mean, firstly, because they understood that the recovery should include all national economies. Before the presentation of the plan, there was a lot of struggle between member states saying it should be only the ones most impacted that should receive, and so on and so forth. But I think for countries like Germany, it's important that we have a well-recovered European market, because after all, one point that AmCham continues to emphasize, and it's so crucial, it's our European single market. Our economies are so interconnected that if we do not have a well-recovered European market, one member state on its own will be very difficult for it to cope. So even for the biggest one, having well-recovered European member states and their markets is extremely important. The second reason is that there is also a fear that this crisis could increase the disparities, both economically and socially, between member states in the EU. And this is something that would even harm more the single and the common market that we share. This is also something that would diminish the trust in the European Union, and it could transform into a very strong anti-European attitude. So with this fund, it is also an attempt to avoid such a scenario. And thirdly, I see this, and this is this forward-looking part of the plan, as a modernization fund. There is clearly a political will in the Commission, but also in the bigger member states, to invest heavily in modernizing the European economy. We had the same debate and aim during the Green Deal, so that the member states should look at the instruments much more as a means of modernization and as a supporting tool for developing new economies based on high technologies, on low emissions, on much higher added value. So that would be a very key and crucial point, and it would be a point where I would be very happy if we discuss more and brainstorm where the businesses represented today think we need to invest those resources. Now, very briefly on the plan, I have to explain that it's a plan that is suggested, but is still being discussed. So the Council, the body that represents the member states and the heads of states and governments, and the European Parliament are still to discuss together with the Commission. And hopefully these discussions will end by September or October at the earliest, and I believe that's a reasonable timing. However, it might take a little bit longer because we want to see this plan operational already in 2021. So this 750 billion are on top, as I said, of the 7-year budget, which itself is around 1.1 trillion. Out of 750, 500 billion will be invested through grants and 250 through financial instruments, but in the same time having low interest loans and venture capital instruments and so on and so forth. Those money will be raised from the financial markets by the Commission, and the repayment will begin in 5 to 10 years, depending on what is being agreed. What is in for Bulgaria in particularly? Over the past couple of weeks, you might have seen different sums varying between 12 and 15 billion euros. This is a correct sum that foresees that Bulgaria could possibly receive the funding from the recovery fund amounting to this amount. But that would all depend on the projects that are being submitted and presented. These projects will cover a wide area of business sector, but it will definitely, as I've mentioned, focus on connectivity, on sustainability, on resilience of economies. When I said projects, this means that an important part of this recovery plan is actually that the Commission puts a conditionality to these resources. The Commission will evaluate the plans and projects. There will be an annual evaluations of the performance of the projects in their different phases. And it's projects, I have to say, together with reforms. So those projects should come up with a point that says, what do we actually reform? Only then the next phase of the funding will be provided, and only if there is a positive evaluation of the previous phase. So in other words, the control of the spending of the funding, one could say, will be slightly increased. Another point is that the Next Generation EU has a core aim to make Europe's economy also more independent. This will mean that the plans again will be, focused on future-oriented things, such as whether it's catering about renewable energy, clean transport, better connectivity, the digital skills, the data economy, investing in digital manufacturing, digital transformation of the energy sectors, implementation of AI-powered grids, for example, and solutions both for the public sector but also for the business sector. Importantly, also unleashing the data potential that is held both by private companies but also public entities for achieving of these goals of common good, such as less air pollution or better urban planning or better management of resources. In short, again, I want to emphasize that the idea is that the plan does not achieve more of the same. It has to aim to achieve a structural change while using this crisis as an opportunity to make that change. Also, and I'm going to finalize my intro. I probably went slightly maybe over my 10 minutes. As rapporteur of the EPP group in the Parliament on the data strategy, I think and I see it as a potential to completely basically reinvent every process in the future. And we do not have enough emphasis on this strategy, for example, the data one, as we should, because data is the fuel for basically every wave of innovation in the past 5 years, but also in the next 15 or 20 years to come. So I'll be also very curious to hear your views on how do you picture the data economy, it's how it collaborates, but also even from a CSR aspect as well. So that was a concrete point in the end, but I just wanted to say that that's going to be a focus in my work. So it could be something that could trigger some interest, questions and comments. But thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today, and special thanks to the collaboration we had over the past 2 months in helping and supporting hospitals and doctors in need across the country. Thank you.
Wow, Eva, thank you very much. I never have seen such a complete and full with details explanation of the package. So now I feel myself prepared to answer any journalist questions about the effectivity of the package. And I like that you like the name, Next Generation. I can tell you, certainly you are part of this next generation, not because of your age, but the way how you're accepting things. It's amazing. Actually, I have a list of the questions, but before going to the list of the questions and talking about the data economy, data-based economy, I would like to go back to Susan, because you mentioned a couple of times AmCham in EU, and Susan has two hats, as you already know. She's CEO, and she's leading the most powerful organization in our network. Although she's modest and she said that all of us are working like a network, that will be very great to hear how you cooperate on the European level. And as you mentioned already, you started just before the pandemic situation. So Susan, back to you. I feel like I'm in the studio. You are such outstanding speakers that I don't have much to do with all of that. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And yeah, just maybe a few words in response with regard to Eva's words. But now with my other hat on, I'm now speaking as CEO of AmCham EU here in Brussels. I'm in Belgium. And yes, indeed, Eva referred to that. I was going to mention it. Eva was indeed a guest at our town hall. We do weekly town halls, and she was one of our first guests. And we have always had fantastic collaboration with Eva, and we appreciate that, as well as being a long-time supporter of our Youth Entrepreneurship Awards. So thank you for that, Eva. So let's just turn straight to the economic recovery. And perhaps, firstly, I speak for 158 companies, US companies invested in Europe. Many of those would also be members of AmCham Bulgaria. So what we try to, we describe ourselves as the voice of US business in Europe. Indeed, we saw we see the tremendous efforts that are being done by Europe to mitigate the economic crisis. And indeed, the Commission put forward, as Eva's outlined, the economic recovery plan. AmCham EU supports it, so I should make that point from the point of view of US business. We support it, and we believe that the plan as a whole puts exactly the right emphasis, to your point, Eva, on the single market. Absolutely, I can emphasize that. Business needs the single market to be free and flowing to do well. And also, we appreciated the emphasis on green and digital. They are absolutely critical engines for the recovery. I would point out maybe to your members, Peter and Olivier, that we released as business a position paper last week. I'd encourage anyone to look at that. That might be good background for your businesses to look at. So with regard to the short-term measures, I'm going to come to that with addressing the ongoing crisis, but maybe firstly, on the Next Generation EU plan. So as a business community and the US business community, remember, we welcome the Next Generation plan, and we see it as a very positive step in the right direction. And it does show, we believe, the added value of the EU in promoting coordinated action and coming up with these solutions to this crisis. Really pleased with the EU's ambitions. We're stark supporters of the single market and would support any action to strengthening it, because it's through the single market that we're going to get resilience of the EU economy. And we've always emphasized this, as you rightly said, Eva. But as you also said, Eva, it remains a proposal. So it still does need to be discussed. You said yourself, I think you gave some time of when we see this through, October, November. It's still the early days. So with regard to AmCham EU being able to go into the details, we're still discussing that here with our membership, particularly, concerns that may arise could be how this is going to be financed. So without going into the details of the financing, there's something that maybe AmCham Bulgaria members should be aware of called own resources, which is one way of also saying taxation. So we would want to, of course, monitor where that taxation is coming from, to try as far as is able for not too many additional costs to be put on companies, because many of our companies are already under pressure from the consequences of COVID-19. So we would prefer not additional costs in this particular form. So I think that what was called own resources is something to watch out for, and we are forming our position on that. But at the same time, single market has to remain competitive and flourish. And indeed, business benefits from the single market. We're very aware from that. It has to flourish, otherwise we will never get back to work. So perhaps if I can just comment on this just very briefly, I'll just tell you what the 5-6 areas are that we put in our short-term recovery paper, which complements, that is less on the monetary recovery plan. These areas which we would focus on are absolutely vital for business in the short term. We're also working on a longer term paper. In the short term, business needs we need to build effective healthcare systems across Europe. So whether it's, it's first and foremost still a healthcare crisis. It's not over yet. The health crisis is not over. We have to remember that. So we need to continue to take bold steps to ensure resilience of the healthcare sector, whether it's collaboration with industry, coordination of tracing apps, forecasting data, being prepared for another pandemic. So that's the first area. The second area will be assuring the safety of workplaces and production sites. Again, absolutely essential for business. So we welcome the Commission's roadmap towards this, gradually lifting confinement measures, but we still have to remain aware that we're facing a public health emergency. Lockdowns could return. Health and safety of employees is important while maintaining business continuity. So we've got, it mustn't be too burdensome. Let's harmonize protocols, think about PPE and information to employees. Thirdly, liquidity. Many companies are struggling with this. It's absolutely essential to provide this to Europe's economy. So we're going to need, indeed, fiscal stimulus, pro-growth tax policies, and as the containment measures are lifted, recovery may be uneven across Europe. I think you mentioned that, Eva, where recovery is weak, we'll need fiscal intervention. So we have to be very sure of this, keeping it a level playing field and not making it too uneven. Otherwise, we're going to have more problems down the line. So in liquidity, capital markets union remains a priority as one example. Then we come to the single market. I won't say too much about that because I've already mentioned it. We have to preserve the integrity of the single market. It's the main driver of economic recovery. We must stand up for it. So yes, Eva, you made that point. We all need to speak out and say that we need it. If we don't, it's going to be too late. There's an absolute urgency about doing this. It impacts the livelihoods of European businesses and consumers. The fifth one is actually the fairness of the state aid measures that have been put in place. Let's be very careful that they remain fair. Won't go into that in too much detail. It can be quite technical. They have been put in place. There's been some discussion about whether they're fair across the board. They must be. So when they're lifted, make sure that fairness remains. And finally, fostering the right digital environment. And I think you're going to get into that, Peter. The digital sector, we've seen the role it plays. It's going to be crucial to short-term and economic recovery exit strategies. Technology underpins so many products and services across global communities, governments, healthcare. And as we continue, digitization is going to help us return to what we hope is going to be more resilient and sustainable economy. So I finished there. I realized I didn't mention it, a single market. It goes without saying. Customs facilitation, no new tariffs, and green lanes. So with that, Peter, just to say, it'd be great to hear from your members, but I hope that was useful. And please see us as a resource in Brussels with the messaging and the papers that we're coming out with. And thank you for listening, Eva. We look forward, as always, to working together with you towards facing these common challenges. Thank you, Peter.
Susan, amazing. Thank you very much. Actually, this policy paper, we have Dani, our policy manager here, who is going to send this policy paper that you issue in AmCham in EU, just to make it all of our members aware about that. So we have now exactly 20 to 25 minutes max. And I don't want to delay with my interesting, observations and stuff. Thank you very much that you value my digital skills. Actually, I'm outdated a bit anyway. I'm trying to catch up as I'm far away from the technology those days. But we have here members of our digital committee we have here the board. I'm going to change this webinar for the first time. I rather we're going to ask the members to, because for the first time, I believe we have such a deep analysis what is actually proposed. And we have here a lot of our members. If someone wants to ask the question, please feel free to do. I have a list of the questions, but I'll hold my horses for the next round, because it's always good to see members asking the question and having the discussion. Does someone want to ask the question? I could kick it off myself, no problem at all. I can do
one
it.
in the chat, Peter. There's one question in the chat.
Aha, one question in the chat. So if somebody can help me with the chat, because I don't see the chat, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's Milko from.
I actually saw it, so I can shoot.
Oh yeah, good, good. Can you, Eva? Thank you very much. Actually, somebody, if you can read the question, because not maybe everyone see it. At least
Yeah,
I.
sure. The question is basically on, so there is a European health program proposed within the recovery plan. The question is whether Bulgarian companies will be able to get advantage of it, what amounts are dedicated to digital healthcare, more specifically. So first of all, yeah, I mean, just a bit of an observation, I think. So it's the first time that the EU actually comes with a very big increase when it comes to the European resources for health. And this is importantly to stress that goes besides supplies and surveillance. Indeed, it goes into basically digital transformation of health, e-health. These would be some of the key priorities for this amount of resources that are provided, which is a huge chunk. It's the first time such a big amount is ever allocated. So this amount should support things such as such as the European Health Academy Network, which is part of the European Global Health Plan. The idea is to have at least one university hospital per member state to serve as a national diffusion hub for European cutting-edge medical research and staff training. And I think here there's a good example coming from the US. I think more partnerships such as with the US Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority should be established in order for us, when we face similar crises, to be a little bit more prepared, but react faster in similar situations, also most importantly. We want to, on one hand, support and ensure the security of supply of medicines. So that would also be tackled among those resources, and make sure that we are less dependent by foreign actors. But in the same time, we want to see that we invest in AI, in data analytics, in other supercomputer tools for the creation of a proper EU health data platform, as well as EU Data Center for Emergency Coordination, in order for the EU to be able to help collect data for clinical uptake, to identify behavioral patterns, flows of people, vital products, and basically to be able to run predictive analytics. So we also want to see in this plan to encourage the creation of e-records for patients, and most importantly, interconnectivity between member states. We sometimes forget how the European single market works. There are professionals commuting every day from one member state to another. There are people living a couple of weeks or a couple of months because of their work in one member state and not their own. So we need to keep this in mind. So therefore, the amount is quite significant. Indeed, most of this amount is dedicated to enhancing technology into health. And again, there is opportunity for all technological companies, including Bulgarian ones. I think here, most of those grants, if I may, they will be managed locally, nationally. So it is up for the activity of the business to also be part of, once those public plans are put for consultation, to be vocal, to propose solutions that again are forward-looking. And I think the companies that are on this call and many of the ones that are part of AmCham Bulgaria network are exactly this sort of companies, and are exactly the ones that could provide these forward-working solutions. So I think we cannot say what's the amount allocated out of 9.5 billion, because that would depend on the plans that we submit, basically.
Okay, I was muted, so thank you very much for this answer. Actually, I have a question. You said that in this 750 billion, 250 will be the direct, will be the loans or financial instruments, venture capital, and other stuff, and the rest will be grants. So, do you know exactly? I'm sure that you know, but who is the actual recipients of those grants? Which industries, which companies, how they define the tiny border between the grants and financial instruments, and who is actually from different industries receiving what? Do you can you give a general overview on that, Eva, if it's possible, please?
Yes, of course. I'm sorry. I hope you were able to hear me well, because apparently this microphone sometimes touches my my clothes. So I hope connection hasn't been too bad and my answer was understood. I will try to keep it better and straight.
No, it is absolutely fine with the voice. Don't worry. We
Okay.
understand you loud and
Okay.
clear.
Okay, perfect. So we have to know that in order to apply for these resources, it would be basically the member states applying for these resources most of the time from the recovery plan. There is other instruments that I will mention in a little bit. Basically, member states will be using the operational programs that we know today, that they exist as part of the long-term budget. But now those operational programs could be a bit different to take in account the modernized, to take into account the recovery plan, which aims to modernize our economies. So basically, there will be no excluded sector. The logic this time was to focus on thematic areas, basically, of investments, not so much the sectors. Energy efficiency in any sector, for example, or digital transformation in any sector, digitalizing of the production. So around 80% of this money are foreseen to be for public investments. But of course, those public investments cannot be just made by an institutions. You would need companies to execute and to do the job, so to say. And this is why I think we need to have a very forward-looking plan to say, okay, we had some businesses affected very much by COVID-19, and we have some national measures that were already taken. But now, as of 2021, we are actually getting 15 billion euros more for 4 years. No one would have made such an investment in Bulgaria in 4 years, amounting 15 billion. So let's just think very strategically which sectors we could support. One example, and I don't know if Mr. Brashnarov's on the call, but we talked about it in a recent webinar in Brussels, is about bridging the gap in between, you know, these very advanced technological companies we have in Bulgaria, whether foreign or Bulgarian ones, and the many SMEs that are not so technologically advanced. We have a huge disparity and a very big gap. So it would help the economy if most of those productions or just the way those companies operate are brought to the next level, so to say. So this would be one example where we would like to make sure that there is no technological divide and digital gap, because it's something that, it sees in the reports of Brussels think tanks, not just for Bulgaria, but for Europe as a whole for the last 10, 12 years. And it's time now that we, make the bridge in between the ones that are very advanced and the others that could be way more competitive.
Amazing. You said that not the industries, specific industries will be supported, but rather innovation and entire tendencies in the digital or industry 4.0, basically, if you may say so. And this is huge amount, 15 billion. So we actually faced a couple of issues because we have seen the initial emotional reactions from the different countries and in our country as well, where the countries tried to defend their own markets and they immediately forget about the common market. We have seen that thanks to Susan and her team, we managed to establish the contact with the Commissioner for Common Market, Thierry Breton, and actually they supported us very strongly in a couple of cases. And I see that Commission is allergic to such a attempt in different countries because this is the common ground for the entire European Union. And I'm super happy that you see this the same way. You mentioned as well that control will be intensify on those programs because this is a huge money, and if they are not spent the right way, that's probably will be wasted money. So absolutely understand. Yes,
yeah,
of course.
Peter,
Sorry.
could I jump in?
Yes,
Do
Eva,
you hear me?
you are co-chair of the digital committee, and I was expecting you to jump long
Yeah,
time ago.
yeah.
Go ahead,
A
please.
long time ago. Thanks, Eva is really a great ally to the business, and she really shows a great understanding of our issues and being the best communicator on all digital aspects that we've been debating lately. Yeah, I would like to raise what she in fact ended with. Because these incentives that we should bring the gap closer or close the gap if possible with SMEs and huge companies or international global players like IBM I'm representing also in the board. It's really crucial to have local policies that incentivize these kind of measures that might possibly be implemented. And it's really a very we need a very close work and collaboration with the government, local governments throughout Europe. And it's really crucial for companies like us to have your active participations in all these conversations, because you can guide the policies that might be seen as much at most level useful globally, internationally, and locally. And it's a gap that we have to work together to close. It's really crucial for us because, as you said, data, which is in the core of this digital single market, have to have trust, and protectionism here is definitely not the key. We see some governments how they raise local policies that rather stimulate data localizations or think on this kind of policies that are not useful for bringing us together, rather aiming at some divisions that definitely do not support free trade and trade collaboration. And we should maybe aim to communicate more strongly with governments all over Europe how they should be much more on the side of the businesses and on the side of these policies that stimulate free flow of data. And you've been really a great communicator of all this. On the other part, you raised the 5G, the networks that need wireless networks that need to be built throughout in order to make this one Europe. That's again hugely important when building, for example, 5G national strategies locally. And it's we see you as our great ally. And if digital is could be seen as ally to green, I think active members of the European Parliament like you are really seen by the business as allies, and we should unite forces to communicate all important policies to our governments. I'm sure you are on the top of these debates that are going throughout Europe, and it will be important even further to communicate more locally with our government on these topics. I don't know how we can be of your support. It will be great if we bring some kind of channel working more closely with you on certain topics. That will be our, top priority also in the coming months, because you said that this is still suggested, this plan is suggested. It is aimed to be ended at the end of this year. It's a quite ambitious plan, and I don't, do you think it really will be implemented till the end of the year? How do you see the time frame of these initiatives? How fast we should be as businesses also?
So Eva, you may answer this very long statement and question from Eva, but she's actually the only one in our board who is really dealing with that policy in her company, and I know that she's very deep into that. So please.
Thank you very much. A really very important remark and question. So on the first part. Right now, we speak about modernizing economy, and we speak about how digital has to be a priority, green has to be a priority, sustainable economies have to be a priority. But this is the message sent by the Commission. In order to basically be able to get to those plans that we are talking about, this message has to be echoed by governments, by national leaders, by national authorities, by regional and local authorities. So if this is not the case, then those plans will remain the nice piece of paper. And the reason why I say that is because many of you know that a lot of plans that we've had, including for 5G, because Eva mentioned it, they're there for many years. And very little progress has been made. And maybe it's the wrong example because one could get into the disinformation around the topic and so on, but there was no disinformation 5 years ago on the topic, right? So we could have jumped on the moment and used the resources allocated to invest in very high technologies back then that would have made this crisis seem slightly less intense than it is right now. So what's very important, and last night we had a meeting with Ursula von der Leyen, and my question and urge to her was to make sure that, there are either some sort of expert exchanges on a national level, even on a local level, between members of the Commission and member states, because these plans have to become plans of the national member states. I would, when we speak about these billions, and I go into a medium-sized town in Bulgaria, and the local authorities there pose me a question. So do you think we could use those funds to repair the road or to repair the school? Because let's say there was a natural disaster. Well, it's the question simply no. The idea of these funds is for different purposes. You have the cohesion funds for this sort of purposes, but you cannot think of both to be used for the same thing. The idea now is that when a future crisis comes, and it could be a pandemic, it could be a cyber attack, it could be any sort of crisis, we are better prepared. And so we all have to echo that message. And this message could be echoed already as of today, despite the plans not being finalized, because I think now the finalization of the plans is going to be in terms of the amount of money. Should it be a bit less, and how much a bit less in terms of grants and loans? When should we start repaying? How shall we start repaying? Because there's another topic of the own resources, which I haven't started, but I recently gave an interview for Bulgarian media, and some friends of mine in the business sector called me up after the interview and said, "Oh, we very much appreciated what you said. It was very clear." But said we both looked at each other at the point when you said the own resources of the EU will be debated for a few years. And I said, "But why?" And they said, "Well, in business, this is ages. How are you going to spend a few years to debate whether we should have, owned resources, such as plastic tax, for example? Why would it take you years?" So I'm perfectly aware that some of these, discussions take way too long, and so on and so forth. But I think we should be active on where this money should be spent immediately, whether through discussions with the people responsible, whether through providing concrete suggestions in any form and way I could also support and facilitate this. It would be extremely important for all of us, for our generation, but also for the next generation. It's simply true. If the next generation is supposed to repay a part of this money, it would be way better prepared if we've given them a modern economy to repay these funds. So when is this going to be concluded, basically? I hope September, October, because I think all European leaders understand how high the stakes are. If we do not have this plan agreed by the end of the year, this would only make our economies much worse off, and our society and our businesses. So the stakes are very high for us to be arguing how much in loans and how much in grants. It's clear that some countries, especially the southern Mediterranean countries, are in deep need of grants. Do we want to take loans coming from a center-right EPP group, a representative? Well, no, we are not the biggest ones that are in favor of that, but we see there's no other option currently being available. So this is when it comes to the plan. You had also some points on data. I think when it comes to data, we need a very good communication about why data is so important, how it could facilitate the innovation, but also better policy making. If we had invested in having better data flows and data exchanges, this crisis we could have weathered it in a different way. It would have still hit us hard because it's the first pandemic in many years that Europe faces, and we have not learned from other countries that have faced similar situations in the past. But, it could have perhaps eased us. And also, when it comes to data, I think we should not let the unnecessary restrictions of data in local and national level. And this is what the free flow of data is aiming. In the Open Data Directive, I think we managed to make sure the public funded data will be open for use and also innovation. So I think we made certain important steps. And, also Peter was saying you're into this topic. Many of us are, but the broader society, when we speak about data, is just about, is my data protected? And most European citizens don't even understand that narrative. So it's about the businesses and institutions to understand how this could fuel wind into our economies further.
Thank you, Eva. It was very comprehensive. Actually, we are 4 minutes by 3 already. We have a lot of questions for the digital taxes, which I'm not going to comment right now. But as you mentioned the data, I just want to somehow summarize what you said. People really don't understand sometimes that data is actually going to fuel the artificial intelligence development, and you cannot have data if you don't have a 5G, because you cannot do the Internet of Things and sensors. I'm super happy that the member of European Parliament are so deep in this technology. Actually, we're not talking IT now, we're talking about any industry as we speak. Just what Eva mentioned, you probably don't know that today, due to the situation with innovation in medicine, the data in medicine is doubled every 73 days. And Eva knows that because IBM is working on Watson, the artificial intelligence, which is helping the doctors to making the conclusion and choose the medicine, because one doctor needs to read in 24 hours, 48 hours to be updated to all of the news. So we really don't understand how those things are important, and we would like to have you further in our discussions about that. And probably because we need to finish, I want to
Hey,
go.
Peter.
Yes, I want to go
Yeah,
to your sector exactly, Olivier. That was my idea. Go ahead.
yeah, no. I think I mean I know we're over time, and I knew it would happen because we're such an important topic and great speaker. I'd like to have Krasi, who from Contour Global, who would like to ask a question. And I think Victor Guguchev also on the chat left a question. So what I would propose, Eva, is maybe we can have these two questions lumped together, and then you can address us, in the last minutes. So I would like, Krasi to ask, and then Victor, once you hang up off the phone, you can follow up. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier, and thank you for the opportunity. I was just wondering how can, if you have any views on how we as a business can be more engaged in supporting the development of these plans. And here probably what I need to highlight is the importance of investment climate in Bulgaria for attracting and keeping investors, private investors. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. You may do you want to squeeze in your question as well?
I believe that
Okay,
I can read it for him. He
yeah,
asked a
please do.
question. Yeah, so Victor is wanted to ask a question about the future project related to sustainable development goals, which are adopted by United Nations, and one of their main priorities education, and that's how you see that topic. By the way, all of the questions that haven't been answered will going to be sent to your office, and Neno will going to help us you to have them and answer them. So feel free to answer as much as you can. I know that you have a sharp meeting at 3:20, so you have 3 minutes to go. So please choose what question you to answer, and this depend. I'm leaving the timing of this meeting in your hands, Eva, now.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure. I think we've seen that an hour is not enough, but it's nice, when you mentioned earlier, we say we're in Sofia or Brussels or France and so on, and we are all in the same virtual room, so that's important. A few things. So first of all, on Krasimir's question, I believe, I try to say it in a very simple way. A more direct way would be the following. You are one of the most important organizations in Bulgaria, and your voice is very much heard, and you contribute hugely to a lot of the decisions that are being taken. So if I'm you, I would probably initiate, already in the next couple of weeks, a discussion with the Vice Prime Minister to engage deeply into concrete suggestions. You have your working groups. You already have plenty of suggestions for the modern economy of how Bulgaria should progress in the next couple of years. So probably only if you gather those and remind them of this suggestion and ideas would be way more helpful in this crucial period now, because those plans are probably starting slowly to form. They will be open for discussion to the general public and to organizations such as yours, but you could try to already embed your suggestions and your ideas further ahead of when those plans become public. And therefore, as I said, it's not about just reforming a sector, it's about these key areas, so to say, energy efficiency, digital transformation. These are the two most key ones, I have to say, and there are a few others, of course. But again, I will be, if there's any way I could further facilitate or, put you sometimes in touch with colleagues that have already started their own plans from other countries that are similar to our economy, that would be key. Then when it comes to foreign direct investments, a very important topic. So we should not just say, oh, wow, the European Commission is giving us 50 billion euros. Now we could, we have some investments secured. It would be very good to continue to find ways to attract foreign direct investment. I could think that this would be more difficult today rather than 3-4 years ago, and especially 6 months ago. There are a number of reasons. Of course, COVID is one of them, but most importantly, it's the type of economy we have in Bulgaria, and that if some years ago we were known as a destination with a relatively professional and good labor force, but also relatively cheap labor force, I'm afraid this is no longer anymore seen as a first reason to come to the country, because labor force is neither so cheap anymore, nor is available. So there we also, for our demographic situation, we need to hugely invest in education, hugely invest into skills, and to having more prepared individuals. Having foreign direct investment could be also linked of how to retain the talent and how to attract talent. So it could be talent that's Bulgarian and left, but it could be also other talent that is not Bulgarian, and we need talent right now more than ever. So talent would be key, I think, but also
I believe that we.
Yeah. So I guess it's Neno's way to take her to our next meeting, maybe.
Yes. Maybe this is not Neno's way, but because I ask people to switch on all of the video, we obviously. Danny, can you take a picture right as we speak, and we'll see if Eva will going to join us again. I don't see. Now it's time for picture.
Yes, let's do the
But let's
picture.
ask Eva not be frozen as she.
Well, Eva is already in picture mode, though. But
I know, but
it's not the
that's
best
frozen.
one. But...
Obviously, something happened with her connection, because all of us are speaking quite well. I don't see any challenge. I see all of the people. Danny, please.
I'm
Eva.
back.
Yes, Eva. Sorry, but you have been frozen for a second, and we want to make a picture of all of us. So now we need your beautiful smile, if you don't mind, and some photograph. Who knows the photograph? Danny, can you do this picture for us somehow? Neno especially asked me to have a picture, my friend. So you should know how to do that. Are you?
Yeah, I can. So,
and I will speak meanwhile, just to utilize the time. Eva, although we haven't heard the last sentence, what you said, it was amazing meeting, I would say, very deep in knowledge, and with all of the things that you provided to our members. I we'll continue this for sure. I always used to know that you know very deeply these topics, but now I'm even more sure when I heard your answers and your vision for the next generation, if I remember right. And with that, I want to close this wonderful webinar, having this picture, and I hope that you will be our future guest. And maybe a few words to our friend Olivier, who is said we in Bulgaria a couple of times. So you feel you're Bulgarian now, Olivier?
Yeah, well, I miss Bulgaria, I have to say, because I'm still not allowed to come, but in July I hope to come. No, thank you all. I think it was great exchange. As always, we run out of time, but as we said, we need to continue this conversation. And thanks for your enthusiasm, vision, and it was very good for all of us. So thank you again.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and
bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.